Hello and welcome to In the Light with me, Anna Isabel. And today I have with me, I'm really excited about this because I've been reading this book and it's so brilliant. And it's written by David Elkington, who is here. Hello, David.
Hello, Anna. It's lovely to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. So I'm very excited. The book is called The Ancient Language of Sacred Sound, the acoustics science of the divine. And this is what it looks like. And the reason I'm so excited is because just chapter 1 alone, I read many, many wonderful books, but I don't often use the expression that I'm about to use. It blew my mind. And the reason it blew my mind is because I was out walking today and I was thinking about it. And I was thinking, what was it? And it was just that you explained things, certain things, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But what that explanation did was it led to so many things falling into place in my mind about how things worked, whether it was crystals, which, different aspects of shamanism. Suddenly everything made sense. And I just got so excited when I was reading it. And so I'm really happy that you're here to so I can share this with my audience. So to begin with, then, I think it would be very good if you talked a little bit about the title, Ancient Language of Sacred Sound, the Acoustic Science of the Divine. So I think I'm just going to let you talk a little bit about that because that's a good introduction.
I was walking through the nave of Wells Cathedral about 30, almost 40 odd years ago, giving my age away now. And I'd had a pretty rough time. It was coming up for Christmas. I had fallen heavily in love with somebody and it had gone its course. And off she'd gone, and I was kind of left slightly heartbroken. And I was kind of in an odd situation because I just left art school and I was thinking, what am I going to do with my life? And then I saw this great big oak door to the side, and it said to the chapter house. And I thought, I'm just going to go and wander up there and see what's around. And there, I opened the door, and there was this beautiful, beautiful medieval staircase that was very broad and went up in a gradual spiral. And you could see where it appeared to look melted in places because the footfall of so many people over 800 years or so had worn it away. And I'd gotten about a third of the way up, just in sight of the roof, the octagonal roof of the singing. They were rehearsing Christmas carols for the concert on Christmas Eve, and suddenly I felt myself completely detached from my body. I suddenly felt myself somewhere else. The feeling lasted all of about a minute or so, and when I came down from out of that state and eventually staggered out of the oak doors leading to the chapter house, I was a completely changed human being. And I thought, that is what I'm going to look for. I'm going to go on this quest. I'm going to find out what happened to me and why it was so obviously this place and its construction that had induced in me such a remarkable state where in it, I felt I knew everything all at once. But however, having suddenly come back to Earth, having plunged back to Earth, not only did I feel that I was wearing lead boots, but suddenly all that knowledge, all that information was dissipated. I couldn't access it anymore. And I wanted to access it so I could begin to understand it. And that's what the journey was about. It was about this whole idea that somehow the acoustics of the sacred place provoke our brainwave patterns in such a way that it provokes knowledge. And so the more I went worldwide to look at this whole idea, the more I discovered that there was a very intimate connection between the myth of the hero and his mother, the earth goddess, and the coming of written language or script, and that this meets in our brainwave patterns, which are so heavily affected by these places that it gives birth to scriptural form, which we then created as what today we call the alphabet. So if you then look in these mythic heroes and all of their tales of daring do, every single one of them more or less relates that he brings written language. He brings the ability to speak. And of course, the greatest example, of course, is Jesus Christ himself, who in John's Gospel is called the Word. And of course, that relates so much because it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And of course, it goes on to relate how God created the universe. And of course, if you go to your English dictionary and look up the word universe, it will show you that it's actually the co-joining of two Latin words, uni and verse, which literally mean one word. And of course, when you start looking at the dictionary and you think, my goodness me, it's all to do with acoustics, because you then have this idea of experience, which of course in Latin is expirare, which means from out of the spirit. The word God is derived from the Indo-European word guth, meaning voice, and so on and so forth. Everything goes back to this myth. All of our language, the meanings, all of the wisdom of that is the co-joining of the sky god and the earth god in the vision of the hero, who then in spiritual form descends upon the ancient divine king or high priest, who brings forth this knowledge for the people. And we as individuals can undergo exactly the same experience by going to these profoundly wonderful places called either Gothic cathedrals, pyramids, temples, stupas, you name it. You can go there and you can be induced to have that experience, and you can witness for yourself this living, breathing miracle.
So now comes the next bit, which is the bit that made me want to jump up and down. I was so excited reading this. And it's to do with the actual measuring of sound, and where you could say that the earth itself has a voice. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Yes, that's actually central to the entire thesis, because we're living in a time now of great environmental crisis. We're having to wake up to the idea of being a bit kinder, not just to the planet, but to ourselves. We need to wake up to the wisdom of everything that's around us, even within the animal world and the plant world. And the interesting thing is that at the beginning of history, in deep prehistory, when we're still living in caves or in trees, the first thing we do when we come out of the caves, we don't build shopping don't build a local bank, that even
I'm
before we
sorry,
build our own homes, the first thing we do.
I lost you there for a moment. Could you just go back to at the beginning, what the first thing we built, if we can do that?
Yeah. At the beginning, the first thing we build when we come out of the cave is not banks, not schools, it's not shopping malls. We don't even build our own homes. The first thing we build is the sacred site. Now, why? And it's summed up very well by that wonderful piece of graffiti that we saw in the 80s when the film E.T. was out. It said, E.T. phone home, and it's like sort of, if you're a parent and your child's about to go to university, the first thing you say is, don't forget to stay in touch. And it's almost as if planet Earth is saying, I'm your mother, and you're about to enter into a new realm of experience, into a new world. You're going to create civilization. You're going to become very oriented towards your own species, but I want you to stay in contact with me. And of course, when you then start looking at the idea that our brainwaves are affected by these places, well, the Earth resonates at 32 hertz, approximately. That's 32 vibrations per second. And this is because it's hit like a bell by cosmic waves from outer space. So it could be, you know, a massive galactic explosion. It could be a massive quasar burst, whatever. When those incoming waves hit us, the bell resonates. Sorry, the Earth resonates like a bell, and we resonate in tandem with it. But so we can only therefore resonate at a harmonic of the Earth, which in our relaxed state is approximately 8 hertz or vibrations per second, which is a harmonic of 32 hertz. So in other words, we are in contact. Now, you go into this state twice a day at the very least, an alpha state it's called, when you go into and come out of sleep. So if you have a problem, you sleep on it. Why? Because going from your everyday resonant frequency of 30 to 33 vibrations per second, the delta state, you have to go down gradually to a state called the theta state, which is 0.5 vibrations per second when you're asleep. To get to that, you have to go through the alpha state because you're relaxing, you're getting into it, you're about to go to sleep or you're about to come out of sleep. And in that state, you can communicate directly with the world around you. It's in that state that you make connections. It's in that state that you can glean a greater idea of the knowledge around you, of the books that you're reading, of the people you've been speaking to. You can suddenly begin to understand what they were saying in the wider, broader sense of the word. So we are in contact with Mother Earth.
It also strikes me that that could explain why a lot of healing takes place when we're asleep, because maybe at that point we're connecting with the earth, and that in itself has a healing function. Because we do have, when we go into deep sleep, that's when healing takes place in the body and repair. So it's now making me wonder, is that why?
I think you're absolutely right. That's exactly what happens. And of course, you know, that state in Greek is called Hypnos, who was the goddess of sleep. And she again is connected to wisdom, who was Athena, and of course, who is called in the Orthodox Church, Sophia. Of course, you know, from the word Soph, we've got philosophy, the love of wisdom. We've got anthroposophy, you know, the idea of the love of wisdom in man, and so on and so forth. Again, it's words. Words are the archaeology of the past. They are informing us of where we come from. The very things we take for granted, we use every day, but we so rarely stop to look at them, their form, their shape, their sound, and what they actually convey to us as an undercurrent of wisdom.
Coming back to the earth's vibration and how our brain at certain points generates waves that are in harmony with it, I also was very interested to see you writing about crystals also having their own vibration. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the ancient sites, particularly Newgrange in Ireland, where a team from Princeton University about 30 years ago performed a whole range of acoustic experiments, we found that there are organic and inorganic layers. So the archaeologists were saying, oh, Newgrange has got rings of white and blue quartz, and this was obviously decorative. And I'm saying, no, this was actually scientific because they have different waveforms. So they contribute in their difference to the overall effect of what is happening on the interior. And behind them, you've got inorganic rock like sandstone and rock like that acts as an absorber and a reflector of acoustic waves from the interior. So these places are acting, as it were, in an organic way to affect the way in which our brainwaves actually work. And a sense of the power of rocks. If anybody listening has got a gas oven and you use one of these clicking devices to actually light it, if you look at it close up, you'll see it's two pieces of quartz that are rubbing together that will then effuse a small blue spark. and therefore like your gas oven. And if you look at that on a planetary scale, when thunderstorms hit, thunder doesn't just come from the sky, it comes out of the earth. If you look at a thunderbolt, you'll see it's a meeting of what's coming out of the earth with what's coming from the sky, which of course could be in a mythological way described as the mating game between the sky god and the earth mother, which is why, of course, the gods, some of the hero gods, are portrayed with thunderbolts in their hands. So all of this contributes to give us a scientific idea of what the myth truly was. It was relaying to us information that we have today relayed in a totally different language. We call it science, but it's really no different from myth. And myth, of course, in its original Greek, all it means is that which was spoken. So again, it comes back to acoustics.
Everything comes back to acoustics. This is what I find so exciting, because so we can now see why so much is made of crystals in the context of healing, for a start. But you then go on about talking about our own bodies being crystalline, and I hadn't thought of it like that. So can you explain, please?
Well, yes, yeah, blood is literally liquid crystal. I mean, so is water, of course, but water being the only crystal that expands when you freeze it. If you look at the stained glass windows in some of the early Gothic cathedrals, if you look at the glass, if you can see a piece of glass from a stained glass window from that period and look at it side on, you'll see that the base is a lot more bulbous than the top, because the glass, even in your windows today, is liquid. It is not solid. It only appears to be solid. In 1,000 years' time, the bottom of your pane of glass will be a lot thicker than the top. And in 10,000 years' time, virtually all of it would have sunk beneath. So you'll have air coming in from the windows because the crystal would have just sunk. So you know, the blood going through our very bodies, we think of blood just flowing through our veins. We give it no thought, but it doesn't just flow in one direction. It flows in the form of spirals. And of course, spirals act as transformers, and therefore it gives off an electric charge. So all of those spirals working their way through the main veins then give us an electric charge, which when actually measured, we have a biofield, a bioenergetic field that goes approximately 8 to 10 foot in all directions and can now be measured. So we are electrical beings. Life is electrical. And it's interesting, I was just looking at this the other day. The word electric, of course, is a Semitic word, which the Greeks use, which is a Semitic language. And of course, the word El is the oldest name for God.
I'm sorry, David, can you please repeat that again? Because the signal went very funny for a moment. So if you could talk about the word electric again.
Yeah, I was looking at the word electric the other day, and it's an interesting Greek word taken from Phoenician, which is a Semitic language, because Greek is derived from ancient Phoenician. And the word electricity, of course, has the syllable El at the very beginning, and El in Phoenician is the very name for God. So again, it goes back to the divine. You can't get away from it.
No, you can't. So that, again, now talking about us as being electric beings explains so much. It explains why we can sense things. So many of us call ourselves sensitive, because we can sense things that can't be seen, and including, I guess, things like atmospheric pressure and so on. So we're, it makes me think about a few years back, there was a mouse infestation in a flat that I lived in, and the landlord wanted to put the traps down, and of course I couldn't have that. So he very kindly got one of these devices that emit a sound that we can't hear, but mice could, and it acts as a repellent. Well, I tell you, I had the most awful headaches, and I suddenly realized that when I was out, I didn't have my headaches. When I came in, I did. So I unplugged it, and the headaches went. And he didn't believe me. He thought I was, he thought I was imagining things, but I knew absolutely this was affecting me. And that was just an example from my perspective, but it does make you think about all of the radiation that's out there.
Yeah.
And the fact that for centuries we've known that the full moon affects people.
Yeah.
And so it goes on, and so it goes on.
Infrasound, human beings are a lot more sensitive to than we've formerly realized, and it's becoming much more appreciated in the medical profession that actually we are much more sensitive to infrared frequencies and infrasound than we previously realized. And I mean, there are other aspects as well. At the back of the book, I think in the last chapter, it might well be in one of the appendices, I talk about the ethmoid bone, which is based about an inch behind the bridge of the nose. Now, what fascinated me about this is that it's a piece of magnetite, and it gives us our sense of direction. Okay, birds have the same thing, which is how they're able to fly and know where they're going. And not only that, but in their undulating flight patterns, they're actually mimicking the actual magnetic frequencies of the planet. And of course, whales and dolphins do the same thing on the sea floor. But I was baffled years ago, because I work as an Egyptologist, and I couldn't work out why, when pharaohs died, they used to scoop out the brains. Because if you lay a body down, as at Smithfield Church, some of the great churches by Hawksmoor, you go down into some of the crypts back in the 80s, before they were turning them into coffee shops. You'd see these great lead coffins. It was all very Gothic and very eerie. And you'd open them up, and there were these really well-preserved bodies inside. But they were all laying down. And when the time came to clear these places out, some of these bodies were being looked at by anthropologists and forensic scientists, etc. And they're all heavily suited up, because some of them still had the smallpox bacillus on them. I was one of the last chaps to have the smallpox jab about 20 years ago, because of some of the work I was doing with some of these bodies and things. But when you actually lifted up the brain pan, out came this liquefied syrup, about 2 tablespoons full, which was formerly the brains of the person concerned. So if therefore the pharaohs were removing the brain, they were doing it for a reason, because the mummies were interred. So why remove the brains if over a period of a few hundred years, it's just going to liquefy into a puddle at the back of the skull and not permeate any aspect of the body, and therefore ruin the mummification process? And then it hit me. I was in the Great Pyramid, and about I think 1878, the Wainman-Dixon brothers had discovered a couple of implements in one of the ascending shafts in the Queen's chamber, and one of them it was called a Pesh en Kef knife, and it has a design like a mermaid's tail. It's back to Capricorn and the goat's tail again, and it was called. I thought, oh, I think I know what this is. It's a birthing knife used by the midwives to cut the spiritual umbilicus of the new pharaoh during a rebirthing rite within the pyramid. The old pharaoh, his father, who has now become Osiris, the god Osiris, had been mummified, and in order to allow his spirit to be released, they had actually dislodged the piece of magnetite in the bridge of his nose, which had left therefore a hole, and therefore they had to scoop out the brains, because otherwise it would have seeped through the skull and damaged the mummification process. But by dislodging the piece of magnetite, it dislodged the sense of direction, the sense of being rooted here on earth. So spiritually, it helped the release of the spirit.
That's utterly fascinating. And as you're talking about that, it's made me wonder whether in cultures that were more attuned to nature, whether that's one of the ways in which they were able to make sure that temples included the cardinal points, so they knew which way was north. Obviously, they would have used the sun, and the stars as well to have a sense of direction. But I just wonder now whether our own internal compass, if you like, would have been involved in that.
Yeah, there's actually an example of this I put in the book. There's a pilgrimage in Ireland around Queen Maeve's cairn, which is a kind of a small pyramidal shaped cairn atop a mountain in one of the Irish counties, the name of which eludes me for the moment. But people would go to the top and approach it in a 7 spiraled circle, as they do at Mecca and elsewhere. And then they would kiss the cairn, and they had done their pilgrimage to St. Patrick. However, in the olden days, they were prone to banditry. And one of the bandits was actually captured one year, and he was killed. And when he was interred, because he'd been persecuting pilgrims on a holy pilgrimage, he was interred with his head facing north, so his spirit would never rest. He could not see the east, he could not see the west. So there's the evidence for what you've just said.
Yeah, it's I have yet to finish reading your book. I want to read it as quickly as possible because I'm so excited while I'm reading it. But actually, it requires slow reading because it is so packed with wonderful information. And I know I could speak to you for days, let alone hours. So I'm going to remind everyone that the book that we're talking about is The Ancient Language of Sacred Sound, the acoustic science of the divine, with written by my wonderful guest, David Elkington. And so on that note, I want to say, I'm going to put the link to the book on the description box. And David, thank you so much for your book and your time today.
Thank you very much for having me. It was very enjoyable. Thank you so much.
And I'll also put your email address on the description box in case people want to get in touch. Thank you all for watching In the Light today. Do please subscribe so that you can see all the wonderful interviews that are on here. And next week, I'm going to be talking to Julia Hollenberg about the healing power of pleasure. So more healing, and that's what In the Light is all about. Until next week, goodbye.